Buddy, thank you all for being here today. I'm going to call the hearing to order, so to speak. I am Connor Lamb from Pennsylvania's 17th District, and with me here are a number of members who represent steel-producing regions of this country. I appreciate everybody taking some time to be with us this morning. Really, the reason that I understand we do this hearing every year, and this is my second one, is that I don't think enough people in Washington, D.C. really appreciate the vital role that your industry and your company still play in not only American life, but the world. You know, somebody gave me a book not too long ago that was called Still the Age of Iron and Steel, making the point that iron and steel still dominate the world economy today. And whether you're talking about, you know, daily transportation and infrastructure and the construction boom that's happening in Western Pennsylvania, all dependent on the availability of steel. Or for anyone who has served with or interacted with the United States military, you know, everything we ride in, shoot, control, has some component of steel and other metals. And it really, you know, speaks to our strength as a country, our ability to maintain this vital industry. For those of us from Western Pennsylvania, we also look back and think about how the height of the steel industry in our part of the country really was also probably the strongest time for the middle class that we've had. And somebody broke this down not too long ago to say, you know, what were $30 an hour steel jobs in the 60s and 70s really became $15 and less healthcare jobs in the 90s and 2000s. And, you know, there's a lot of reasons for that, but I think at the most basic was that we produced a lot of steel, used a little bit of ourselves, and sold it to the rest of the world. And now we produce a lot of healthcare, use most of it ourselves, and sell only a little bit of it to the rest of the world. And that's a very different value proposition. So I think as a region in Western Pennsylvania, but also as a country, we need to think a lot harder about our industrial policy and the way that the actions of this government are affecting companies like yours and especially their workers, and whether we're creating enough opportunities for the modern equivalents of those $30 an hour jobs. And I was able to speak with a few of you before this morning about coronavirus and just the light that may be shining on our connections to China and supply chain issues that we're going to have. And it may serve as a reminder to the American people why it is that you go out of your way to maintain an essential industry like yours for hard times like this. And that may be something that we're able to build on going forward. So looking forward to hearing from all of you today about how the last year has been, what we can do to make things better. And I also just want to acknowledge that we know many of you are making some serious investments in R&D and ways to become even leaner and more efficient going forward, ways to emit less carbon in your production processes or offset it. So hoping to hear from you about those things today, because we know that's very important. I'm sure we'll talk about infrastructure, both as an economic development tool, but also a way to help drive demand. Again, maybe, you know, the latest threats and slowdown are something that can drive both sides together on that issue down here in Washington. We are certainly hoping for that. So again, want to thank all of our witnesses. I want to also thank our Chairman Emeritus, Pete Visklosky, for his important work on this caucus here and in Congress. He's made a lasting impact. Want to recognize our Vice Chairman, Representative Mike Boss from the great state of Illinois, and Representative Rick Crawford from Arkansas. We're going to go through some introductions of the witnesses. After we introduce each person, we're going to allow them to present their testimony, and I think that is how we're going to proceed. So, for the opening statements. Okay. Apparently I have to recognize my vice chairman for their opening statements as well, and I'm sure they have much to say, so we'll start with Mr. Boss from Illinois.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. Wait a minute. There we go. Had to figure out which mic I had to turn on. First off, welcome and thank you for being here, and thank you for what you do. First off, we have this is our 2020 hearing in room 2020. How about that? Let me say this. One thing that happens when you're in these positions that may motivate you one way or another, right after that and many of you know this story, but right after I became a member, we had the layoffs at U.S. Steel in Granite City. When you see 1,000 people lose their job a month and a half after you get this one, it becomes your passion to know and understand an industry. Let me explain this. Knowing and understanding what foreign governments have done to your industry, we want to make sure that we move forward in the right way. When the president kicked in 232, it was a tremendous help, but we can't stop there. And when we can't stop there, but we also need to let the American people know that making sure that steel production in this United States is vitally important to not only our economy, but to the national safety. Because what you do and the ability for you to do it, where we can actually control domestically where we are going for safety purposes and just for production of, and whether it's the economy or whether it is on national security. Thank you very much for being here. What we want to do is hear from you today and so that we know what do we continue to do to make sure that your industries thrive and continue to do the positive things, all the jobs you provide. Let me tell you, and this is, I want to explain to you how important this is. If you watch a community that loses 1,000 jobs, and those jobs come back, and you go to the coffee shops and the barber shops, and in my case, because my wife's a cosmetologist, we own a beauty salon and the beauty shops, and you listen to the people, how important these jobs are, what it means to not only the workers there, but then the spin-off jobs from that. And looking forward to hearing your testimony today, and with that, I'll yield back.
And Mr. Crawford, go ahead.
Okay. Well, I would first like to just acknowledge the tremendous turnout of our colleagues. I think in the time that I've been in this position and been involved with the Steel Caucus, this may be the biggest turnout we've seen of members to attend this hearing. So thank you guys for doing that, and ladies for being here. I think it's important that we recognize that we're all impacted by what you do. For some of us, it may be more of a parochial issue than others. But as my colleague indicated, this is a national security industry. We can't say that about every industry, but we can certainly say it about the United States steel industry. So thank you for being here. And I had some prepared remarks, and I'm going to aggravate my staff that she went to all the trouble of making these prepared remarks, and I'm going to go ahead and forego those for the sake of moving forward, but associate myself with the comments of my friend, Mr. Bost, and yield back to the chairman.
Thank you, and I think now we're going to introduce the witnesses, and I believe Rep. Crawford is going to start with the head of Nucor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Leon Topalian is President and CEO of Nucor Corporation. He joined Nucor in 1996 and has held various positions within the company in multiple locations throughout the United States and internationally, including Vice President and General Manager of Nucor Yamato Steel Company, which is located in my district. In September 2019, Leon was appointed President and CEO, which became effective on January 1, 2020. Leon serves on Nucor's Board of Directors and as a board member of the American Iron and Steel Institute and World Steel Association. Mr. Topalian, thank you for being here.
Thank you. Chairman Lamb, Vice Chairman Crawford, Vice Chairman Bost. On behalf of Nucor's 27,000 team members, thank you for this opportunity. I am Leon Topalian, President and CEO of Nucor, and on January 1st, I did succeed John Ferriola as CEO. I know you work closely with John, and join me in thanking him for his many contributions to Nucor and our industry. As I sit in this chair for the first time, I'm excited for the future of Nucor and for our industry. America is the best place in the world to make steel, and we are grateful to have leaders like you who have worked to promote policies we need to grow and prosper, such as tax reform and USMCA. Also, more aggressive trade enforcement has been effective in keeping unfairly traded imports out of the U.S. market. Last year, import market share was at its lowest level since the Great Recession. You have helped to create an economic and regulatory climate that enables us to make the investments necessary to stay on the cutting edge of a highly competitive global industry. Right now, Nucor is undertaking 10 major growth projects throughout the United States, representing $3.5 billion and thousands of new American jobs. New markets require innovation. For example, a decade ago, Nucor did not make steel for the automotive market. Today, we're working with every one of the 14 automotive companies that assemble cars in North America. from iconic brands like Ford and GM to new players like Tesla. With our new investments, we will make the advanced high-strength steels that automakers need to make their lighter vehicles stronger and more fuel efficient. Last year, we were the first EAF steelmaker to receive the prestigious Supplier of the Year award from General Motors. We are producing the steel of tomorrow, excuse me, not just in automotive, but for wind, solar, and the most advanced military equipment ever used by our fighting men and women. Not only is the U.S. the best place to make steel, but it is also the cleanest place to make steel. Due to the prevalence of EAF steelmaking, our industry produces steel with 1/3 of the emissions of steel produced in China. In fact, U.S. industry emissions are down 15% since 2011. Nevertheless, we are always looking for opportunities to increase efficiency, use less energy, and reduce our environmental footprints. Finally, America is one of the safest places to make steel. At Nucor, we are committed to how we care for our Nucor family through the value of safety. 2019 was the safest year in our company's history, and I'd like to thank the 27,000 men and women who represent our company for this tremendous achievement. I appreciate your ongoing continued support and your leadership, and I look forward to working with you on behalf of our industry and my Nucor team members. Thank you.
Thank you. It's now my great pleasure to introduce Tom Conway. Tom was elected by the International Executive Board to succeed retiring International President of the Steelworkers, Leo Gerard. We miss Leo and we honor him for his many years of service and his contributions here, but very, very excited to have President Conway at the helm. The Steelworkers are the largest industrial union in North America, and President Conway has been in charge effective July 15th of last year. He is the 8th president of the USW. President Conway grew up in a union family in New Jersey. His father was an active member of the International Union of Operating Engineers. His mother worked in a brush factory where she successfully organized a union and negotiated labor contracts. After serving 4 years in the U.S. Air Force and attending a trade school for airframe and power plant mechanics, Mr. Conway was recruited by Bethlehem Steel in 1978 to work at its Burns Harbor Works along Lake Michigan in northwest Indiana. He joined Local 6787 and quickly became a union activist. President Conway has since testified numerous times before Congress, the ITC, the Steel Caucus, and in the steelworkers' own words, he is considered the union's most experienced contract negotiator. It's my pleasure again to welcome President Conway to the Steel Caucus, and we look forward to your testimony.
All right, thank you, Chairman Lamb, Co-Chairs Crawford and Boss. Thank you for the opportunity to testify at this year's Steel Caucus hearing again. My name is Tom Conway, and I'm President of the United Steelworkers, and as Chairman Lamb said, we're the largest manufacturing union in North America and the single largest union representing workers throughout the steel industry. As we look at the state of the steel industry today, there's many challenges and opportunities our union faces. By some metrics, the industry is strong, but there are not only signs of weakness, also looming threats that have to be addressed to ensure that we best prepare the industry, its workforce, and indeed the country for the future. On the positive side, imports are down, domestic steel investment is up, and U.S. workers are producing almost 10 million tons more than they did in 2015. Our steel demand in 2019 amounted to 98.5 million tons. It's still a 2% decrease from what was produced in 2018. The industry is nearing sustainable operating capacity numbers, but profitability is down as the global economy and lack of demand catch up to the near-term relief that came from the 232 tariffs. And we can't let the 232 tariffs be our only defense against predatory practices and overcapacity in steelmaking. OECD committee continues to highlight that there's over 400 million tons of excess steel capacity globally. We need to work with our allies to secure multilateral disciplines to reduce steel capacity, overcapacity, and sanction the bad actors that are out there. The coronavirus stresses that there's a need for maintaining the 232 relief because the steel inventories being held in by Chinese traders right now are at their highest level since they've been since May 2006. A promising factor regarding how we address fair market access is through the bipartisan USMCA agreement that we've recently concluded. The inclusion of the provisions requiring 70% of steel in vehicles originating in North America qualify for the preference should help ensure that we do not see a lot of foreign steel undercut the benefits of the free trade agreement and cause unnecessary job loss. The future holds promise if we take the opportunity to build on the current efforts. Here we need increased demand, worker training, improved labor rights. This is about demand as much as it's about ensuring free trade. The U.S. industry needs consistent, strong demand to ensure long-term capital investment and profitability. For example, strong Jones fleet provisions are ensuring that the first Laker in 35 years is being constructed in Sturgeon Bay. The Great Lakes vessel is scheduled for completion in the middle of 2020. It's going to provide employment for about 700 shipyard workers, along with new business for the yard's contractors and suppliers. That's why the USW has been supportive of H.R. 3829, the Energizing American Shipbuilding Act. This legislation would require that vessels built in the U.S. transport 15% of total seaborne LNG exports by 2041 and 10% of total seaborne crude oil exports by 2033. We need to rebuild our shipbuilding capacity in America and provide a lot of jobs and a lot of steel industry jobs. Technological advancements and improvements in steel facilities often mean less man hours, and the union knows Congress must work together with labor and management to handle the impacts of it. At U.S. Steel, the Mon Valley Works investment is a prime example. Currently, it can take as long as 4 days to produce a coil of steel. The continuous caster and hot roll technology that's going in place there can result in that steel being produced in as little as 4 minutes, and will have a pretty significant reduction in the number of workers at the plant. And we think we can handle that through attrition, and there'll be no involuntary job losses. But it is still hundreds of good jobs that this technology will eventually replace. There has to be a federal role. Instead of letting workers drift into a job training program that is at its lowest funded out of the OECD countries as a percentage of GDP, the industry must also invest in technologies to reduce emissions, combat climate change in this country. Policymakers and steel companies have to collaborate to overcome technological and economic challenges and ensure that the U.S. industry is not left behind as a global demand and cleaner products grow. Finally, the Gaines bargain to make steelmaking jobs good-paying, high-benefit ones were established through collective bargaining. We strongly urge both sides of the aisle to see the power of the strong middle class by improving workplace cooperation through unionization. That's why we applaud the House passage of the PRO Act, modernize our labor laws to allow for better worker participation, will aid in ensuring a strong labor management partnership that the steel industry needs to continue. I thank you. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Mr. President. I believe Mr. Boss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to take this moment, if I could, to introduce Richard Hoff, Senior Vice President of Strategic Planning and Corporate Development for U.S. Steel. Mr. Hoff assumed the role earlier this year and after many years of serving as senior executive roles with the company. In his current position, he is responsible for creating, implementing U.S. Steel strategies to achieve profitability, growth, and focus on safety, production quality, delivery, and cost of U.S. Steel workers and consumers. Earlier in his career, he served as a national security position with the U.S. Department of State and the U.S. Army's Arms Control and Disarmament Agency and the Department of the Navy, which we won't, as you, the chairman, and as General Berkman to my right, we won't hold that against you. We needed a ride as Marines. So, as a native of Pittsburgh, Mr. Fruhoff earned a Bachelor of Science degree in Foreign Service from Georgetown University, a Master of Public Policy degree from Harvard University and Kennedy School of Government, and his law degree from the University of Virginia School of Law. Mr. Hoff, thank you for appearing, and we're looking forward to your testimony.
Well, excuse me. Thank you, Chairman Lamb, Vice Chairman Boston, Crawford, and the other members of the caucus. I am Rich Fruhoff, Senior Vice President, Chief Strategy Officer for U.S. Steel. And on behalf of the nearly 28,000 men and women of U.S. Steel, thank you for convening today's hearing. Our President and CEO, Dave Burritt, regrets that he cannot be here to speak with you and asked me to convey his appreciation for the invitation for U.S. Steel to update the caucus on the current state of the industry and the significant strategic actions our company has taken in the past year, one of which Tom has already kind of beat me to the punch on. But global steel overcapacity continues to challenge world markets and the domestic industry. Global overcapacity is estimated to be over 440 million tons annually. That's more than 4 times the size of our market here in the United States. It remains imperative that our government maintain strong actions against unfairly traded steel and that we never allow America's steelmaking self-sufficiency to be undermined by imports. With the growing awareness of the risks posed by an over-reliance on a global supply chain for products vital to our country's security and well-being, let us remember the strength that steel provides our country. Steel is critical to our economy, our security, our infrastructure, our energy independence, and our downstream manufacturing capabilities. We must maintain the ability to mine, melt, and make the steel needed to defend, build, and power our nation. March 8th marks 2 years since the President signed the Section 232 National Security Action on steel imports. This action continues to help the domestic steel industry weather the worst impacts of global overcapacity and unfair trade. The Section 232 is spurring the U.S. industry to innovate and invest to strengthen our ability to supply America's demand for steel. We have announced multi-billion-dollar investments in the past year. We are advancing our strategy to become a world-competitive, best-of-both company that combines advanced integrated and mini-mill steelmaking technology. These investments include the $1.5 billion endless casting and rolling and cogeneration plants that will secure steelmaking for another generation at our Mon Valley Works outside Pittsburgh. The more than $750 million invested in the hot strip mill at Gary Works in Indiana, and acquiring 49.9% of Big River Steel in Osceola, Arkansas, with the opportunity to acquire the remaining 100% over the next 4 years. We are also nearing completion of a new electric arc furnace in Alabama and a new proprietary continuous galvanizing line that will produce advanced high-strength automotive steels at our Protec joint venture in Ohio. At last year's hearing, our CEO highlighted the restart of both blast furnaces and the return of 800 jobs at our Granite City Works in Southern Illinois, and it continues to supply the high-quality products to customers across the country we need in this country. Each of these integrated facilities has supplied iron ore from our 2 mines in northern Minnesota, and we are proud to produce steel that is mined, melted, and made here in the USA. Last November, we also announced a goal to reduce our global greenhouse gas emissions by 20% by the year 2030 from a 2018 year baseline. We also look at new technologies to see if we can further reduce carbon emissions. And we encourage the federal government to support R&D in these new technologies. Most importantly, we had a great year on safety in 2019, but we won't rest on our laurels. While this past year has seen positive developments, the American steel industry remains vulnerable. We are still confronting real challenges, and this remains a fight to recover from decades of deep damage inflicted by the flood of foreign steel into our open market. The Section 232 must be kept strong. A sudden weakening or dramatic change to the policy could result in a tidal wave of foreign steel targeting our market. Please be vigilant on the 232, on fighting circumvention around the world, and on maintaining strong measures against dumped and subsidized steel, and seeking avenues to reduce global overcapacity. We also urge the same bipartisan support that we saw for USMCA to address the federal infrastructure crisis in this country. Enactment of a long-term investment in our nation's infrastructure would yield multiple benefits, increased steel demand, improved reliability, and more efficient shipment of raw materials to our plants and products to our customers. And it would stimulate further capital investment that would ripple across the broader economy. We encourage all of the members of the caucus to use your influence to support this shared priority. Thank you again for your leadership, all of you, and thank you to Representative Visklosky for his years of support for our nation's steel industry, and thank all of the caucus for the work you do to keep America strong. Thank you very much.
It's my pleasure to introduce our next witness, Barbara Smith of Commercial Metals Company. Barbara Smith was appointed President and CEO of Commercial Metals Company in September 2017 and Chairman of the Board in January 2018. Barbara joined CMC in June 2011 as Senior Vice President and Chief Financial Officer. She was promoted to Chief Operating Officer in January 2016 and then as President and Chief Operating Officer in January 2017. She spent her entire career in the industry holding leadership positions with Gerdau Ameristeel, Ferro Technologies, and Alcoa. The Association of Iron and Steel Technology awarded her the distinction of Steelmaker of the Year in 2019. Ms. Smith, thank you so much for being here, and you're recognized.
Thank you. Chairman Lamb, Vice Chairman Crawford, Vice Chairman Boston, distinguished members of Congress, thank you for the opportunity to address the Congressional Steel Caucus this morning. I appreciate your support of the U.S. steel industry and the U.S. industrial manufacturing base. I'm honored to appear before the Congressional Steel Caucus to share ideas and provide our perspectives on the American steel industry and our policy priorities. As indicated, I'm Barbara Smith, Chairman, President, and Chief Executive Officer of Commercial Metals Company, a Fortune 1000 company with over 9,000 employees in 29 states. CMC is an industry leader in sustainable and innovative steel production, fabrication, and recycling. We are a founding member of the Steel Manufacturers Association. SMA serves as a voice for the nation's electric arc furnace steel producers. The EAF sector accounts for almost 70% of U.S. steel production. CMC's state-of-the-art mills make high-quality steel products using 95% or more recycled content. In 2019, we continued our commitment to innovation and new technology with the construction and commissioning of a 63,000 square foot expansion and manufacturing line producing hot-spooled rebar at CMC's Mesa, Arizona mill. In 2018, we completed the $600 million acquisition of 4 U.S. steel mills and 33 rebar fabricating facilities from a Brazilian-owned company, preserving over 3,000 good-paying American steelmaking jobs. I'd like to discuss 3 important topics during my time with you today: sustainable steelmaking, infrastructure, and economic and trade policy. Sustainable steelmaking comes naturally to CMC. We have been in the metals recycling business for over 100 years. We recycle steel scrap to produce new steel products. Through the efforts of domestic steel producers, 60.4 million tons of steel scrap was recycled in 2018. Through the combined efforts of domestic steelmakers at this table and around the country, the United States represents the safest, most sustainable, and most efficient steel industry in the world, with lower CO2 emissions than other countries. American steel producers have raised the bar for steel producers around the world through wide-scale recycling investments in technologies that reduce air and solid waste emissions and promoting efficient energy use. In the U.S., CO2 emissions intensity is down by 37% per ton since 1990. 1 ton of steel produced in the U.S. generates the least amount of CO2 among major global steel producers. It should also be noted that additional carbon dioxide emissions are added to a ton of steel when it's shipped for long distances from countries like China, Vietnam, and Turkey. If all the world would be as advanced as the U.S. when it comes to sustainable steelmaking, the result would be a fairer trade and a better environment. To talk about infrastructure, our country depends on a vast network of critical infrastructure: airports, roads, bridges, freight, ports, electric grids, to keep its economy humming. Noting the age of many infrastructure systems, experts say delays as well as rising maintenance and safety costs are now inhibiting our nation's economic performance. A strong federal role in any infrastructure package will not only serve all Americans who will use our infrastructure in the 21st century, but it will also increase steel demand, supporting the domestic steel industry and our workers. In order to get our infrastructure to a level that will help ensure our national security and improve our economic competitiveness, we ask the federal government to focus on these three priorities. First, create an adequate level of long-term funding for surface transportation infrastructure needs that prioritizes highways and bridges. In states across the country, such as Alabama, Arkansas, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, and Texas, lawmakers have found ways to generate revenue to deal with much-needed infrastructure upgrades and repairs. It's time for the federal government to consider similar approaches. Second, the support investment in water infrastructure through adequate long-term funding of the Water Resource Development Act. Finally, adopt a job-centric approach to infrastructure investment. An additional $1 trillion investment in infrastructure has the potential to create 3 million jobs over the next 5 years if planners and appropriators prioritize projects on the basis of their job creation potential and project criticality. Maximizing job creation with a heavy emphasis on long-term jobs that generate tax revenues that help offset the upfront cost to taxpayers should be a key objective of any infrastructure investment plan. A couple points on economic and trade policy. CMC and SMA support the President's steel trade and economic policies. The 232 tariff passage of the USMCA and pro-business policies involving tax reform, regulatory certainty, and workforce development have created a positive economic environment for 21st century steelmakers. The 232 tariffs in particular have resulted in a decrease of unfairly traded steel imports, increased capacity utilization, and have spurred over $12 billion in investment announcements with minimal disruption to the domestic steel industry supply chain. These state-of-the-art investments represent a modernization of the domestic steel industry that will increase our global competitiveness. Many of these investments include advances in robotics, automation, the use of artificial intelligence, and environmental controls with process optimizations that reduce emissions. USMCA passage is good for domestic steelmakers. It improves enforcement, rules of origin, content requirements, and strengthens the melted and poured standard, which defines what constitutes North American steel. Enforcement of these existing trade laws is vital too. This is why I was pleased that the SMA lent its support to the Congressional Steel Caucus letter to the House Appropriations Committee calling for adequate funding levels for agencies responsible for trade law enforcement and compliance. Domestic steelmakers can compete with anyone in the world on a level playing field. Commercial Metals Company looks forward to working with you. Thanks for your attention and for your bipartisan leadership to support American steelmakers. Thank you.
Thank you. It's now my pleasure to introduce John Brett, who serves as the president and CEO of ArcelorMittal USA, overseeing 16 facilities in 9 states and over 15,000 employees. Mr. Brett previously served as Executive Vice President of Finance, Planning, and Procurement for ArcelorMittal and joined the predecessor company, Inland Steel Company, as an associate accountant in 1988. He has held many different leadership positions in accounting, finance, supply chain management in the steel industry. Mr. Brett holds a degree in economics from DePauw University and an MBA in finance and accounting from the University of Chicago. Welcome, Mr. Brett.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Lamb, Vice Chairman Boss and Crawford, and members of the caucus. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. We at ArcelorMittal are deeply grateful for what this organization has accomplished on a bipartisan basis for so many years. I would like to take this opportunity to especially thank Congressman Pete Visclosky for all that he has meant to this industry, this caucus, and ArcelorMittal. We operate around the country, but since our highest concentration of employees live and work in the 1st District of Indiana, myself included, we've proudly considered him our hometown congressman. We are thankful for his 35 years of service to our country and to steelworkers and their families in Indiana and across the nation. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, the last 2 years have been a roller coaster for ArcelorMittal USA. As I testified last year, 2018 was our best year financially since 2007. We hope to stay on that path in 2019, but the steel market took a challenging turn as consumption of our core products dropped 4%. Declines in auto production, Service center purchases and construction all contributed to a drop in our business performance. Consequently, average hot band prices plummeted by $230 per ton to a price lower than pre-Section 232 levels. We began 2020 with a more optimistic outlook. We thank you for passage of the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement. The USMCA will be a welcome spark to demand as it leads to increased use of American steel in North American auto production. We are also grateful for President Trump's Section 232 action, which has resulted in a steady decline in steel imports since the second quarter of 2018. Finished steel imports fell to 21 million tons in 2019, their lowest level since 2010, and the lowest market share since 2003. U.S. companies are regaining customers lost to imports as a result. I sometimes hear questions about the value of the Section 232 actions in light of the industry's diminished performance in 2019. Mr. Chairman, history has shown that when the U.S. economy is stronger than the global economy, steel flows to our shores. Just look at the aftermath of the Asian financial crisis. Imports surged into the U.S. 33 steel companies filed for bankruptcy, and thousands of steelworkers lost their jobs. I can safely say that having the Section 232 tariffs and quotas in place is more important than ever. We and our customers are facing great uncertainties in the marketplace right now, driven by fears of a downturn in the economy, the threat of a global pandemic, and the daily buzz of a national political campaign. The solution, in our view, is a renewed focus on the demand side of the equation. America desperately needs a national infrastructure bill that will deliver real money in real time to create and protect real jobs. I know that each of you recognize the need for infrastructure investment in our country. The problem, of course, is how to pay for it. For years, the steel industry has advocated for a user-based funding mechanism, such as revamping and indexing the federal gas tax, which historically was the most efficient way to pay for new roads, bridges, and railways. If there's a better way, let's get it on the table. The USMCA was an impressive bipartisan victory. We urge you to follow this success with bipartisan passage of comprehensive infrastructure legislation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you. It's now my pleasure to introduce Jim Charmley, the president and CEO of Bull Moose Tube Company, located in Chesterfield, Missouri, and probably the best named company of anyone with us here today. I like that a lot. He was appointed president and CEO in 2017 and previously served as vice president of operations for the company, responsible for overseeing 7 plants. He also has held various leadership positions at the Timken Company. Mr. Charmley obtained his bachelor's and master's degrees in mechanical engineering from MIT and completed an executive management program at the Darden Graduate School of Business Administration at the University of Virginia. He lives with his family in St. Louis, Missouri. Welcome, Mr. Charmley.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Lamb and Vice Co-Chairman Boston Crawford, and the distinguished members of the Congressional Steel Caucus. My name is Jim Charmley. I'm President and CEO of Bull Moose Tube, a family-owned company that uses almost exclusively produced U.S.-made coil. Bull Moose Tube is one of the nation's largest producers of pipe and tube products. As we said, we're headquartered near St. Louis, Missouri. This morning, I'm pleased to appear on behalf of the Committee on Pipe and Tube Imports. CPTI is the nation's leading trade association for U.S. pipe and tube manufacturers. CPTI represents members with thousands of employees in 33 states and 94 congressional districts. I speak today on behalf of the pipe and tube industry when I state that without the imposition of the 232 tariffs and quota program, our industry would have faced dire consequences from unrestrained and unfairly traded imports. In fact, as has been said, between 2017 and 2019, pipe and tube imports in the U.S. fell by over 2 million tons. This has allowed the domestic industry to regain its footing. The proactive steps taken by the administration have led our industry into economic recovery. Regarding the U.S.-Mexico-Canada Trade Agreement, USMCA, the industry and CPTI welcomed its passage. We were pleased to see the inclusion of enhanced enforcement and rules of origin provisions. Also, the reduction of 232 tariffs just prior to the USMCA with Canada and Mexico included an import surge provision. Surge protection of imports is particularly important to us because while we recognize the benefits of open trade, we want to make sure that it is fair trade. Specifically, we are concerned about the recent surges of certain pipe and tube products into the United States from Mexico. If left unchecked, these Mexican imports could take a greater share of the U.S. market, resulting directly in job losses for domestic producers. Import surges are a significant issue for CPTI, and we want to ensure that any anomaly or surge in imports is addressed. CPTI also supports Phase 1 of the U.S.-China trade agreement. It's an essential first step in advancing U.S.-China trade relations. Still, China continues to advance a government-led expansion of the country's steel sector. It's critical that the U.S. remains committed to the objectives of the Global Steel Forum on overcapacity, particularly with China. Congress has also expressed support for continuing these negotiations, and we thank you for your leadership on this issue. The CPTI is a strong supporter of trade laws because they enable us to challenge unfair trade. Over the last 30 years, members of the CPTI organization have filed over 100 cases of unfair trade of our products. We've often received relief, which enables the industry and its employees the opportunity to continue to compete and to win. As Congress moves forward with this session, CPTI asks that the caucus pursue key measures in support of the domestic steel industry. First is to continue supporting legislation to enhance U.S. trade laws and enable fair trade with enforceable remedies. That includes strengthening the customs enforcement measures adopted in the Trade Facilitation and Trade Enhancement Act of 2016. Also, as has been said, we also ask for a significantly expanded national infrastructure program, especially including provisions that ensure U.S. funds are used to purchase U.S.-made products. Finally, we ask for full funding of U.S. trade agencies that are charged with customs enforcement and administration of laws which combat unfair trade. In conclusion, we thank this caucus for your leadership on issues of importance to the steel pipe and tube industry, to its workers, and to the communities that we serve. Specifically, we want to also thank former Chairman Representative Peter Zelazny for his continued support and dedication through his tenure. The steel industry in the United States is in a better position today than it was just a few years ago. Much of this is the direct result of this caucus and your hard work with your congressional colleagues and the administration. We need to keep moving forward together, and by working together, I'm confident the U.S. industry will be successful for many years to come. Thank you all very much.
It's my privilege to introduce David Zelazny with Owens Steel Company, a structural steel fabricator and contractor based in Columbia, South Carolina, with plants in Columbia and Wilmington, Delaware, and an office in New York City. David is the president of Owens Steel Company and has served on the board since 2006, has served on the board of the American Institute of Steel Construction and serving as board chair from 2017 to 2019. Throughout his tenure on the board, he has led government relations activities, including the management of a unique and complex case at the ITC on fabricated structural steel imports. He's also served since 2010 as a cleared advisor on the Industry Trade Advisory Committee for Steel, working with the offices of the Secretary of Commerce and the U.S. Trade Representative on trade agreements and policies affecting the steel industry. Mr. Zelazny, you are recognized.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Lamb, Vice Co-Chairs Boston Crawford, and members of the caucus. Thank you all for the invitation to be here and for your all being here as well. My name is David Zelazny. I'm the president of Owens Steel Company and was chair of American Institute of Steel Construction from 2017 to 2019. As a structural steel fabricator, my perspective is one step downstream from the steel makers who are here today. However, we all share the same interest in a strong American steel industry. Fabricators like Owens Steel and nearly 1,000 other AISC member fabricators located in virtually every congressional district in America provide a critical link in the steel construction supply chain. Between the mills that make plates and beams and the cranes that install fabricated steel at project sites, Our plants build the components for America's great steel infrastructure projects. Our workforces cut, drill, fit, weld, and paint the girders for bridges, the frames for power and industrial plants, and the columns, trusses, and floor beams that support everything from airports to high-rises. And the end products of our work are important structures. For example, our company fabricated the steel for the U.S. Capitol Visitor Center, so I can assure you that it is well built. AISC was created 100 years ago to develop standards and specifications for the then infant steel construction industry. Today, our manuals and technical materials are translated into dozens of languages, and our standards are incorporated in numerous building codes. Our quality certification is recognized across the country and sought by fabricators around the world who want to enter the U.S. market. Our industry has also been on the leading edge of construction innovation for decades with respect to developments in design efficiency, models, and fabrication tools. For most of the last century, major American steel projects were fabricated in American steel fabrication plants. Just 15 years ago, it was a shocking national story that sections of the San Francisco-Oakland Bay Bridge replacement were being fabricated in China. But since then, offshore fabricators have increasingly seen the American market as a rich target to sell not just excess mill steel that China produces, but also downstream value-added labor in fabrication. Since 2015, while imports of mill steel may have decreased in some capacities, imports of fabricated steel have increased dramatically, far in excess of the growth of the U.S. construction market. The highest volumes from China, but the next two leading sources are Canada and Mexico, with imports from Italy, the UK, Vietnam, and even the UAE continuing to rise. As a result, foreign steel fabricators have gained far more from the American economic recovery than American steel fabricators have. As many of you are aware, AISC filed a trade case on fabricated structural steel in February 2019. Many members of this caucus signed a letter to Secretary Ross to stress the importance of the case to the domestic industry, and Congressman Crawford appeared and spoke personally at the ITC hearing last month. Thank you all again for your support. Unfortunately, notwithstanding determinations from the Commerce Department that imports from China, Canada, and Mexico are being dumped and subsidized, with dumping margins of 61 to 154% on China alone, the ITC denied relief to the domestic industry on a 3-2 vote just a couple of weeks ago. So where does this leave our industry? First, our downstream part of the industry continues to be injured by high volumes of dumped and subsidized imports. In the trade case, we cited numerous examples of imported structural steel displacing the domestic market, from high-rises in Manhattan to power plants in the Gulf Coast to the roof of the new Rams Stadium. The 232 tariffs have not been extended to fabricated steel, and the 25% tariff on some imports from China under Section 301 amounts to a speed bump. We have urged the Department of Commerce and the Office of the USTR to continue to address the issue of foreign SOE-driven overcapacity, border enforcement, circumvention, and other market-distorting practices, and we urge you to continue to support and fund their efforts to address those issues. Second, with respect to infrastructure, we remain concerned about efforts to water down Buy America laws. Regardless of whether infrastructure is financed through tax dollars, user fees, bonds, tax credit, or any other mechanism Wall Street can dream up, infrastructure is a public trust, and its steel should never be outsourced to offshore peddlers. Infrastructure legislation should incentivize the use of steel made and fabricated in America and eliminate loopholes that can otherwise be exploited. Fortunately, the new USMCA will extend rules of origin to fabricated steel for the first time, which will help close a loophole in NAFTA that was used by Mexican fabricators to bring Chinese steel into New York high-rises. Finally, with respect to workforce issues, the steel industry has been proactive among construction trades with respect to training. Many fabricators have outreach programs with local trade schools, technical colleges, high schools, and even prisons to train welders and fitters to work safely, efficiently, and accurately with steel. As an industry that has been at the heart of American construction and manufacturing for a century, we urge you to find solutions for your constituents who will otherwise be underemployed to pursue opportunities with companies like ours and to incentivize employers to continue hiring, training, and developing the skill sets of your constituents. On behalf of the thousands of members, affiliates, and employees of AISC, the 320 employees of Owens Steel Company, and my family who came to join me here today as well behind me, I appreciate the opportunity to speak today and look forward to working with members of the caucus however we can. Thank you again for your support of our industry and for your time here this morning.
Thank you. And our final witness is Lorenzo Gonzalez. His service as president and CEO of Cleveland Cliffs Incorporated He brings 30 years of experience in the metals and mining industry to the table. Cleveland-Cliffs operates multiple iron ore mines in Michigan and Minnesota that help feed the domestic steel industry. Among the new initiatives, he is spearheading the Cleveland-Cliffs acquisition of AK Steel. As a member of the caucus, as members of the caucus may recall, AK Steel has testified at previous hearings and is the last remaining producer of the electric steel used in the power grid transformers, and one of the key reasons why the 232 was implemented. A serious national and economic security concern, and that was why. So, Mr. Gonzalez, we thank you for appearing and look forward to your testimony. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Vice Chairman Bost, Chairman Lamb, Vice Chairman Crawford, members of the caucus. My name is Lourenço Gonçalves, and I serve as Chairman, President, and CEO of Cleveland-Cliffs. The iron and steel industry in the United States must continue to exist. We are the basis for manufacturing, and we are needed for national security. Times like the one we are living in right now should help us understand the risks of relying on foreign countries to supply us with essential items. Too many multinational companies have built supply chains dependent on China, refusing to acknowledge that Chinese industrial and economic practices are environmentally irresponsible and socially unsustainable. The American steel industry, on the other hand, is a model of how to reduce the environmental impact of manufacturing. We rely more heavily than any other country on environmentally friendly electric arc furnaces, which use steel scrap as its main feedstock. We also operate blast furnaces 24/7, 365 days per year, in densely populated metropolitan areas such as Cincinnati, Cleveland, and Detroit, with virtually no pollution. American blast furnaces use iron ore pellets as feedstock and not dirty and polluting sinter like the Chinese. Cleveland-Cliffs is the largest merchant supplier of these pellets in the United States. Cleveland-Cliffs believes in environmental compliance and continues to invest for the future. We are completing construction of a state-of-the-art hot briquetted iron plant in Toledo, Ohio. The HBI plant will start operations in June this year. The construction of the plant employed 1,200 workers at its peak, and we have generated 160 full-time, good-paying jobs. The investment in this HBI plant, in conjunction with a sister project at North Shore Mining in Silver Bay, Minnesota, Congressman Pete Stauber's district, represents over $1 billion invested in the future of steel in our country. Our 3% carbon content HBI produced in Toledo will contribute to an even more environmentally compliant steel industry. Additionally, 2 months ago, we announced the acquisition of AK Steel by Cleveland-Cliffs for approximately $3 billion, paid for with Cliffs stock and the assumption of AK Steel's debt. We have already obtained all regulatory approvals and fully expect the shareholders of both companies to vote for the transaction, which will close at the end of next week, on March 13. Cleveland-Cliffs is optimistic about the future of steel in the United States, and we see our soon-to-be subsidiary company, AK Steel, as the supplier of choice of the advanced steels and steel parts used to manufacture the cars and trucks of the future, particularly electric vehicles. The United States steel industry is efficient, and we do not need subsidies or protection. But we do need enforcement of our trade laws against bad players. When China and others export their dirty and subsidized steel to us, we export our middle class to them. We must stop that. Decent paying jobs are at the core of peace and social justice. It's our responsibility to defend steelmaking, manufacturing, good paying jobs, the middle class, and democracy. Thank you for allowing me to speak here today.
Very well said, sir. First, we are going to recognize Mr. Doyle from Pittsburgh, and I think for members, we're going to start with 3-minute rounds if we can, just to give as many people a chance as possible, and then we'll come back for more if we have time. Mr. Doyle, you
Yeah,
recognize.
I want to thank the chairman for his indulgence. I have a 9 o'clock meeting. Tom, welcome. Always good to see you, buddy. Mr. Fruhoff, my grandfather, who was Mike Doyle, and my dad, who was Mike Doyle, between them put 70 years at the Cary Furnace and Edgar Thompson steel mill. That facility, along with Mon Valley Works and the Clairton Coke Works, all sit in my congressional district. I've heard from a lot of my constituents over the past couple months in Clairton, and I wanted to give you the opportunity to speak a little bit about the investment that you've announced and the work that you'll be doing at the Clairton Coke Works to not only improve efficiency, but also to improve the environment there for the people that live around that facility.
Thank you, Congressman Doyle. Thank you for that opportunity. As you noted, and Tom was at the announcement last May, and thank you for that too. And by the way, my brother's a member of his union, so we get along okay. You know,
If I could get dues off of him instead of his brother, I'd really do it.
yeah, well, he's a part-time professor, so good luck with that, yeah. We did announce a $1.5 billion investment last May at the Edgar Thompson Works, and as you note, I mean, that was Andrew Carnegie's first steel mill. It's the heart of the Mon Valley Works, and part of the investment is at Edgar Thompson. It's the endless casting and rolling technology. It'll be first of the kind in North America. It's really pretty amazing, the efficiencies you get, the type of steel that we'll be able to make there linked to our blast furnaces. It will be the steel that goes to advanced high-strength steel, the lightweighting of vehicles. And then at Clairton, part of the investment is a cogeneration facility at Clairton, which will have enhanced environmental controls. It will use some of the excess coke oven gas that's generated there and turn it back into electricity. And overall, we expect to reduce carbon emissions in the Mon Valley by about 500,000 tons across it by the Valley complex by reducing our outside purchases of electricity. So we're happy about this investment. We're excited for it. We think it's a great part of the strategy, but it also has a lot of environmental benefits for the region as well.
Thank you. Recognize Mr. Bost for 3 minutes, and if we could get 3 minutes on the clock for who's ever controlling that, I'd appreciate it. Go ahead.
Thank you. Mr. Fruhoff, you know, we've done a lot of work in attempting to address the global overall oversupply of steel. We know China still has a pile laying there waiting to be shipped out if they can figure out a way to rip us off. But as the administration's working forward with new trade agreements now with Europe and the UK, what, if anything, would you suggest should be in those agreements that would make sure that we can make sure that that U.S. products, U.S. steel, has the, it doesn't even need the upper hand because we know we got the best. So what is it we can encourage the administration to put in those trade deals that would make sure that we can continue to be this thriving industry we need to be?
Thank you, Congressman. Well, I think, you know, when you look at the trade deals, the free trade agreements maybe we'll have with the EU or the UK that are under consideration, to me the model is not USMCA. It's what we have with Korea, the Korea Chorus, the free trade agreement there. So we have a free trade agreement, but we also have 232 remedies still in place with Korea, and I would urge that that be the model that is adopted. You keep the 232 remedies in place, but you also embed them in a free trade agreement with the UK or EU. I think that's the better model, not a sort of rehash of USMCA for whatever may come with the EU and the UK.
Thank you. Mr. Gonzalez, in your testimony, you talked about environmental benefits of melting steel in the U.S. Can you elaborate basically on how U.S. national security and the economy would it be impacted if we lost that melting procedure in the steelmaking chain?
I'll be glad to, Vice Chairman Bost. First of all, we here in the United States, we are the only country in the world, at least among the biggest producers of steel, that use 2/3 of our production in electric arc furnaces. That already gives us an enormous heads up in terms of environmental compliance. And second, in our blast furnaces, we use pretty much 100% pellets instead of dirty sinter. So we don't sinter in this country to speak of. We have 3 legacy sinter lines, but they are for internal consumption. They are very small. They don't make up for even 1% of the entire consumption. So 99-point-something pellets. It's a lot less in Europe, a lot less in Japan, a lot less in Korea. I'm talking 50%. I'm not talking 90. So with that, we are compliant. So you don't need to be an expert to understand that, for example, during the Republican National Convention in June of 2016, we had everybody from the entire world in Cleveland, and ArcelorMittal was operating 2 blast furnaces 24/7 during the entire week. The press could not find anything wrong. So ArcelorMittal polluted 0 that week. I live in Cleveland. They pollute 0. So we supply those pellets to ArcelorMittal. So we are not just competent because we come here and say we are. We are. We are just not recognized as we are. And if you allow me to chime in on the previous question in terms of...
Maybe we could come back to that, just because we're going to try to keep it to 3 minutes.
I'm still my time. So
Well, we're
compressed my
it
answer.
it says 5, but we're actually doing
all right.
3. Don't worry, we'll get back to you, Mr.
it's
Gonzalez.
green here, but that's okay.
I know.
I would like to talk about the 232, but that's fine.
We'll make sure we get back to it.
Probably not relevant.
I just want every member to have a chance to chime in. Thank you. Recognize Ms. Kelly for 3 minutes.
Welcome, all of you. Thanks for coming. Of course, I have to give a special shout out to Mr. Napoleon and Mr. Brett, because you're in my district. Thank you for your investment in the plant in Bourbonnais. Really, really appreciate it. Just because I'm running to a meeting right now, so it's on my mind. When you think about, especially you, Mr. Conway, your all the people that you oversee, what are you thinking about the coronavirus, and what are your plants doing? We've had briefings every day. We have another one in about 10 minutes coming up, so I don't know who wants to answer.
Yeah, I would tell you, very much like you, we have briefings almost every day just to understand and try to stay very connected and in front of this. There's a lot of misinformation out there, so that right now what we're trying to do is understand, both from the CDC and World Health, where are the travel bans restricted, what are the things that we need to do to protect our team members, and restrictions in travel to international places and things like that. But very much like you, we're meeting almost every day to just stay in front of it to protect our team.
Sure, thanks for the question. We're doing similar things. We have certainly restricted travel, and the company is certainly doing it at the highest levels. Truth be told, I was to be in London next week. That was called off because we're telling people not to travel, so certainly leaders shouldn't travel. We have formed a task force. We're probably a little bit ahead because we are a global company, and so this has touched us already in some other places of the world. And so we're just trying to get prepared and ready. None of us know the extent of this, where it's going to pop up next. So we're really coming up with emergency plans, things that I've heard in Washington too. Are you essential to come to work? Who can work from home? So we're having those discussions daily. And people are concerned. I was interested to hear that a lot of my colleagues they're actually getting updates from their schools where their children go. So it's on everyone's mind.
Thank you so much. I just came back from Germany, and I can tell you we met with the parliament there, and they do want to figure out ways where we can all work together. They talked about fair trade, and they talked about us being an alliance and setting the rules instead of letting China set the rules and dump all over the world and the other countries. So thank you.
Mr. Crawford, recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Topalian, I'm particularly proud of what Nucor and others are doing to make Northeast Arkansas a leader in steel production. I was out at Nucor, as you know, a few months ago to celebrate the opening of a new specialty cold mill, and I can tell you the community there, as you know, is very excited about the new jobs and the continued investments that give them the confidence that those jobs are going to be there tomorrow. How do your investments stack up to what auto customers are demanding in terms of fuel efficiency and safety?
Thank you, Congressman, and thank you for your support. And Congresswoman Kelly, thank you for your support as well. They stack up very well, and as you know, we've been moving towards the automotive sector for over a decade now, so this isn't something that we've just snuck up on. Meeting the rigorous standards of lightweighting takes a lot of time, process control, investment, hiring the right people, and having the right metallurgical talents to be able to produce the steels of tomorrow. And so the investment in Arkansas for us is particularly exciting. It's going to be the first EAF producer in North America to be able to produce a Generation 3 steel with a galv line that's being built there in addition to the specialty cold mill. So we'll be able to produce a 2,000 megapascal product for the industry that will be coming. And so as that market shifts and continues to move to higher strengths and lighter weighting, Nucor Steel Arkansas and Nucor Corporation will be uniquely positioned to be able to provide and serve that market. And so it's something that couldn't be more proud of and more excited of. And as you met the team there, we have 2,100 team members in Mississippi County that are ecstatic about the investments going in there.
We appreciate that. In the little time that I have left, Ms. Smith, are domestic steel producers able to meet the increased steel demand that would be generated by a comprehensive federal infrastructure program?
Absolutely. I don't want to speak for my colleagues, but we would love that challenge. And Commercial Metals, a couple of things. We built 2 new steel mills in the last 10 years. Our most recent mill is located in Durant, Oklahoma. It started commissioning in early 2018, and it produces exclusively structural steel that would be used in any sort of infrastructure program. I mentioned the 4 steel mills that we acquired last year from Gerdau Ameristeel, and those are also mills that produce structural steel. They were underinvested in, they were underutilized. We've been investing in them and bringing them up to our standards, and they are fully prepared to, generate the capacity needed to support an infrastructure program.
Thank you. Yield back.
Recognize Mr. Visklowski for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I want to thank everyone for their kind words. I did not know I had emeritus status. I assumed there was a check attached to that position in all of the work. Also appreciate the great organization here, as many of you know, and I don't know if there's anybody in this room who was there in the spring of 1977. I was on a congressional staff when this caucus was actually established by my mentor, Adam Benjamin, and other members. But they're finally getting organized, so I congratulate you on that, too. Also, apologize, I might just run over a bit because I want to be reflective. I won't be too long, but also want to thank, as she is called in my office, the Queen of Taconite, Betty McCullum, because I am to be chairing a defense subcommittee hearing at 9 o'clock. The Queen said that she would take it today to make sure that I could finish up adequately. First thing, Tom, I just want to congratulate you as president of the largest manufacturing union in the world. Not so much for your position, but for your lifetime of dedication. To make sure that those who work are safe, to make sure those who work are as trained as possible so they can be efficient employees, and your members are the most efficient in the world, that they're provided and their families are provided with health care, that they're going to have a sound retirement. The fact is, we basically have had parallel careers. I got a government job and hung on to it. Tom did something with himself. He started at 67, 87. In 78, I was already on a congressional staff. I'm going to be at the local on Saturday morning, as you probably know. Joined the International in 87. I came to Congress a year before that. So appreciate very much, Tom, your work. Also do want to compliment the panel. That first year or two, when I was on a congressional staff, I remember a dinner downtown Washington with a gentleman from one of the companies that is no longer in existence, who told me, and I majored in accounting, so what do I know, that the laws of physics dictated that no more than 40% of the steel made in the United States of America could be made by electric furnaces. So I'm sitting there thinking, I just don't know if that's the way you ought to be thinking about the industry in the late 70s, and of course that company is no longer here. Today, as was mentioned repeatedly, you use less energy, you expend less carbon, you have higher quality products, you're more productive, you pay a living wage, and for that I really do thank you, and you have a safer workplace. But as I tell people, spouses can disagree from time to time, and friends can disagree. And I would feel remiss after not having done this for 44 years to express two areas of disappointment, and would hope that next year when we have the State of the Industry session, whoever might be here on the panel, that we're seeing some real progress. I do think after all these years, the industry still has a ways to go in the area of safeguarding our environment. In 2019, in my district alone, we had 8 major environmental incidents. In May of 2019, there was an unpermitted discharge of 260 to 300 gallons of sulfuric acid at U.S. Steel's Midwest plant. During another incident in August of 2019, a significant discharge of cyanide and ammonia that well exceeded permit levels at Arcelor's Burns Harbor plant killed 3,000 fish. It resulted in temporary closures of beaches, part of the Lake Michigan public shoreline. These have a direct impact on the health of your employees, on the communities in which you are, and I would encourage you to do better. The other thing I would just note, and everyone understands the economic trauma my district has gone through. I live in Gary, Indiana. It was described in an article in The Economist magazine as a post-industrial hell. In the last school year, there's over 73,000 less children in school in my district than in 1970. People are born and they leave. Have been working forever to try to open up the Lake Michigan shoreline, because that lake is why many of you are there, and it is the future of that area, not to displace jobs, but to provide new economic opportunities and an improved quality of life. I would acknowledge that USX picked up on an agreement that National Steel had to open up 63 acres on Lake Michigan. They did not have to do that. I appreciate it. Appreciate that Arcelor has made a donation in East Chicago, that a donation in Burns Harbor is helping with the beginning of a construction of a trail in that area. But I would summarize that I've been talking about opening up the lakeshore for 35 years, and we haven't scratched the surface, and I am abjectly disappointed in the lack of cooperation. I'm not looking to displace a job. But the fact is, we have an area in one company. It is in the Indiana Dunes National Park. It cannot be donated until it is remediated. It has been sitting there for over half a century. I'm leaving at the end of this year. I have had meetings, I've seen maps, I've done tours, and nothing has happened. At other facilities, I have been on a bus. I have been on foot. I have seen weeds growing between asphalt on the Lake Michigan shoreline lying fallow. I'm told we will be back in touch. We have ideas. We are going to do something. And I'm sitting here 35 years later, nothing has happened. Those 73,000 kids aren't in school today. 2 of my 3 counties every year this past decade have continued to lose people. I'm desperate to see the right thing done along that shoreline. So whoever is sitting here next year, please work with them and please start making progress after a generation and a half. I compliment you for what you did, but there's 2 areas you got a ways to go, and I would really encourage in a positive fashion to pursue it. Sorry for over my time, but thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
It's due to the emeritus status, really, that that's allowed. Thank you, sir. Representative Guest for 3 minutes.
Thank you. To all our panel, thank you for being here today. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to be away from your families, to come to Capitol Hill, to remind us, as you continually do, of the importance of domestic steel production and the dangers of us relying on other companies to provide our steel needs. I've heard very consistent testimony here from many of you. Mr. Topoli, I want to talk with you for just a moment. In your written statement, in your opening statement, you echoed some of the many things of the other members of this panel, that America is the best place in the world to produce steel, that we produce the highest quality steel, that we produce steel with the lowest emissions. I think your testimony said American steel is 1/3 of the emissions of our largest competitor, China, who likes to dump their product here in our country. Then since 2011, we have seen a 15% decrease in emission, and that the industry that you are working each and every day to see those emissions continue to be reduced and continue to have less reliance on energy. So we're making the best steel. We're making the steel the cleanest, the lowest economic or environmental footprint that we can. And then something that you said at the very end of your testimony that I found to be incredibly important is we are making the safest steel for our employees. I had a chance to visit your facility in Mississippi. I would tell you I was amazed by that facility. But one of the things that really impressed me was the emphasis that was placed on safety. And so my question to you is, can you give me very briefly just Nucor's view on workplace safety and also the programs such as OSHA's voluntary protection program? How does that play into what you're doing at Nucor to protect your employees from injury?
Yes, and thank you for the support and thank you for the visit. At the end of the day for Nucor, our greatest value creators are our team, the 27,000 men and women who make up our family. We talk a lot about our culture in Nucor, and the culture is that team. And the greatest measure of our culture is how we care for our team members through the value of safety. We've made great strides over the last 20 years, and one of the things that unites us all on this panel today is the care and well-being of our team and being the environmental stewards in the communities where we live and work. And so while we've made great strides, we've become really good in lowering I&I rates and DART rates. But our quest, and we just rolled out about 3 weeks ago as I've taken over now as CEO, a challenge to each of our 27,000 men and women, and we spoke in a live format and passed out 27,000 challenge coins to become the safest steel company in the world. And so while we've become good, we want to be great, and our goal and our quest is to deliver 0 injuries for 27,000 team members every day, year in and year out. And so it is a deliberate focus. It is a part of our charge and how we care for our team. And at the end of the day, what we found over years of investment is it doesn't make us slower or less efficient. In fact, it's the opposite. And so the safest our plants are, we see the productivity increases that come along with that. And so the old dichotomy is if you do it safer, it's going to be less efficient is just a shattered paradigm. And so we're going to continue to work hard, and I look forward to building my reputation or rapport with the panel here as we work together to continue to make the steelmaking industry in the United States the safest and the most environmentally friendly in the world.
And I know my time is up, but just to the panel again, thank you for being here. Continue to do what you're doing. This caucus understands the importance of your industry, but we must continue to make sure that everyone on Capitol Hill knows how important that you are to our economy, how important that you are to our nation. So thank you again, and I yield back.
Well said. Mr. Sauber for 3 minutes.
Thank you very much, panelists. Thanks for being here. It's great to see you. This is my second Steel Caucus meeting, and this is one of the best meetings of the year for me because we're all on the same page. And I think it's important to recognize that in Minnesota's Iron Range, 70% of the iron ore used to make steel in this country comes from Minnesota's Iron Range. I am passionate about protecting mining. And to my esteemed colleague from Indiana, I agree with you 99% of the time, with the exception of your Queen of Taconite comment. If my colleague, if she had her way, would diminish mining, and she's trying to do that right now. I will stand up for northeastern Minnesota, the men and women who mine the iron ore. that keep our nation safe. Every single time that we use 1 ounce of cheap, dirty, brittle Chinese steel, we take a job away from the American worker and American family. We've been through tough times. The environment that you're in right now is good. We have to keep it growing national security. The mines in northeastern Minnesota, I've lived long enough to realize the ups and downs. Let's keep it growing. Let's keep America-made steel the #1 priority for us. Look at what it touches. It touches every arena in this nation. Mining, manufacturing has to be made by the American worker. The country of China has tried to eat our lunch for many, many years. The 232 tariffs needed to be put in place. It's a good start. It's a good start. Now we have to build on that. We have to understand that iron ore made and mined in Minnesota affects this entire nation. I had the privilege in August of this year with my good friend General Jack Bergman to ride on the motor vessel Roger Blau, loaded with iron ore pellets from northeastern Minnesota, going across the greatest freshwater lake in the world, listening to those diesel engines hum, and it's the bread and butter of who we are. It's work, sweat, coming from the men and women in northeastern Minnesota that mine this iron ore. And we did it to go to the Sulaks to make sure that this country invests in that second lock that we need. Because we know if it goes down, we are all in trouble. I have to tell you, I agree with everything each and every one of you said this morning. Your statements are spot on. And you see a group of us behind you. Together, we will bring this American-made steel to prosperity again. We have to make sure that the dumping stops and we protect our industry. In Minnesota, mining is our past, our present, and our future. Every single school district in the state of Minnesota benefits from mining because of the royalties they're given. I have a passion for this industry and the men and women that work in it. From northeastern Minnesota to Gary, Indiana, to Pittsburgh, we're in it together. One of the things I won't do is allow one of our citizens, one of our workers, to lose their job because of cheap, dumped steel. I will not do that, and I know my colleagues won't do that. We talk about the environment. You can go to some reclaimed mines in northern Minnesota. There's deer, there's bear, there's birds, there's fox, there's wolves. And I see the chairman shouting me down. But listen, Mr. Chair, thanks for your indulgence, but this is a great meeting for us. When I look in your eyes, it's the men and women of our mining and steelmaking industry that propel this nation forward, and you bet it's a national security issue. Mr. Chair, I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you. Happy to have another Western Pennsylvanian with us today. Mr. Kelly, recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you all for being here, but more than anything else, thank you for your patience. I came here in 2011, and you put out the same message that you're putting out today. And we all sat up here, and we appreciated you saying, we want to thank you so much for your service, and we didn't do a damn thing for you. Not until 2017 did anybody actually back up their words with some action. Now, I represent Pennsylvania's 16th Congressional District, but more than anything else, about a half mile down over the hill where I've spent most of my life in my family's business is a company called AK Steel. And Mr. Gonsalves is with us today. I want you to talk about this because I'm so, it's Lent, I'll stop the first half. I'm so damn mad about what it is. Actions speak a hell of a lot louder than words. We're in a death situation right now because we are the last producer of electrical steel in the United States, grain-oriented electrical steel. Could you please share with the rest of the people here today, and listen, I mean this, I'm so glad you're here. I can't believe that you've sat there for so many years telling us what your problems are, and we keep nodding our head and tell you we're gonna do something about it. And we didn't do anything about it until 2017, and the Congress had nothing to do with it. It came from the White House, so strong leadership. Mr. Gonsalves, if you could, the state that we're in today and the danger that we have of losing our ability to make grain-oriented electrical steel in the United States, and the way right now it's being circumvented. You know, you make steel in China and in Korea, then you send it to Mexico, over to Tijuana, and then they do their act on it, and then they send it back to the States and say, oh, no, this isn't foreign steel. This is from your friends in Mexico. So friends shouldn't treat friends that way. Would you please talk about exactly what's happening at AK Steel and the danger the United States has in losing that ability to make its own grain-oriented electrical steel?
Thank you, Congressman Kelly. I appreciate giving me the opportunity to express that here. AK Steel is the last producer of grain-oriented steels in the United States. What does it mean? It means that we are the last man standing between this country's abilities to produce transformers for the electric grid and having to import everything. During the last few years, Section 232 actually took care of the dumped electric steels from China, South Korea, and Japan. But bad players always find a way to circumvent things. So a couple clients, buyers of electric steels, grain-oriented electric steels, found their way to put pieces of equipment, not entire plants, pieces of equipment in Mexico, in Canada, and they operate more or less like that. Instead of importing the coil directly from these three countries, they import the coil into the west coast of Mexico. Then they slit the coils in molds, move those coils by truck between the west coast of Mexico and Matamoros across the border from Brownsville, Texas, cut in pieces called laminations. These laminations go on a truck. The truck goes across the border and back into, for example, Mississippi, and build a beautiful made-in-USA transformer done with dumped Chinese, South Korea, and Japanese steel, with the great help of our friends from Mexico and our friends from Canada, circumventing under our very nose and taking advantage of our friendship. That's what's happening. I'm buying this company. I'm closing next week. I put $3 billion there. I put another $1 billion in Ohio. So I understand numbers very well. And if I don't get help, by the way, someone here told that Section 232, I think was Vice Chairman Boss, Section 232 was done, among other things, to protect our ability to produce transformers. I'm telling you right now, Chairman Lamb, coming March 13, this thing is not corrected. I told Secretary of Commerce Wilbur Ross that I'm not in this business to lose money. We are together in the business of protecting the United States, but I can't lose money for that, or at least not that much. I'm willing to lose a little bit, but not that much. So I'm closing on the deal. I understand numbers. I know what to do. I need help. The workers in Butler, PA, and the workers in a plant in Ohio, in Zanesville, also need help. I'm talking 1,500 jobs in Butler, PA, and 100 jobs in Zanesville, Ohio, that will be gone. And I promise they will be gone if I don't get help. That's the story.
Yeah, no, I want to thank you, but also, there's not many of our members left because they're off doing other things, and that's very important. You know, we've watched for 50 years the erosion of this business, and we've let it happen. And there's an old saying, you can't forfeit the game and then cry because you lost. It's time for us to stand up and actually defend these industries, not with words and not with an eye or two on the Hill in Washington, D.C., but actually back in the places that we represent and on the floor of the Congress, and make sure we back this administration and encourage them to continue to fight this the only way we can. I'm tired of losing jobs. I'm tired of hearing about what we're doing for people, and I'm tired of hearing people say, well, there's just nothing we can do about it. Well, God damn it, find an answer and get it done. We're losing too many jobs. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, Congressman Kelly.
Mr. Chabot, for 3 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I represent the 1st District of Ohio, the greater Cincinnati area. Mr. Conway, you'll be pleased to know that I was a dues-paying, card-carrying member of the United Steelworkers Union. In full disclosure, it was nearly half a century ago. I was in well, I was in college, and Dorman Products Incorporated, that was the union there, and so I was a member, and but I haven't worked there in nearly half a century. And spent about half of that half a century here. And as the frustration that my colleague, Mr. Kelly, expressed, I mean, having come to a number of these meetings, I certainly understand that. Mr. Napoleon, you have a facility just across the river. It's actually well, just across the district from Cincinnati. Yeah, it's Nucor does. It was Joseph, I believe, Joseph Company some years ago. So we certainly are appreciative of you all being there and the jobs that are there. It's Thomas Massey's district, actually. And Mr. Goncalves, thank you for being here, and I wanted to ask you a question if I could. Cleveland Cliffs, as we've already mentioned, is buying AK Steel and or acquiring it, and prior to that it was Armco, and it's an important part of our area. It's not actually in my district, but I have Warren County very close to it. It's the greater Cincinnati area, greater Dayton area, a lot of people employed there. And as you know, whenever there's an acquisition, a merger, anything like this, people are always concerned about what is this going to mean for our jobs? What's the company going to do? What's going to happen? And you've already addressed that to some degree, and I'm encouraged by that. But I'd be happy to give you a little more time here. I don't have a lot left, but if you could address that issue so I can take that back to those folks that really care about that.
I'll be glad, and thank you very much for the question. We did not buy AK Steel because of the past. We bought AK Steel because of the future. We really believe that AK Steel is the best well-equipped steel company in the United States to develop what's coming. AK Steel has 67% of their order book on automotive. So automotive is our, I'm saying our, I should not say our yet. It's their backbone in terms of the business that they make. And I believe in this, the revolution that's coming for the automotive industry with the adoption of electric vehicles. So there's an enormous opportunity. Middletown is a great integrated steel mill with a very productive blast furnace, with a great hot strip mill. Dearborn, Michigan is a fantastic mill as well, a fantastic blast furnace. We are going to put HBI in those blast furnaces, make them more productive and more environmental compliant, more than they already are. And we are going to grow. We will continue to grow. There's potential for Ashland. There's potential for a lot of things. So specifically in the headquarters in Westchester, of course we're going to have some cuts. We are a publicly traded company acquiring another publicly traded company. So some reduction in headquarters and overhead will happen. But I usually don't touch much at the plant level. The mines in Minnesota speak for themselves, what we have done in the last 5 years. Tom Conaway knows that. We work hand in hand with the USW. And we're going to continue to do that with the workers, with the UAW and the machinists and all the unions involved, and the USW as well.
Thank you very much. I think my time's expired, Mr. Chairman.
Sir, and Mr. Gosar has been waiting patiently, recognized for 3 minutes. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I think everything that's been said has been said, but it's not just by everybody saying it. I'm the Western Caucus Chair, and I'm also the ranking member on Energy and Minerals. And one of the things I will tell you is there's a sentiment in Congress of anti-energy and anti-mining. It has been very poignant. My colleague from Minnesota, Mr. Stauber, has been very poignant about that. You look at supply chain. This Congress, particularly on the House, wants to make us subservient and victims in regards to aspiring us to be success models. So I hope next year you'll see a lot more mining people backing you guys up in the audience, because we're in all this together. It's not just about coal mining or anti-copper mining. It's about anti-mining, period. It's disturbing to actually hear some of the comments. In our committee, I've actually asked, tell me a mine you'd actually back. And I get crickets. It's high time we start calling people out for this. If we're trying to start talking about worldwide ecology and environmental standards, there is nobody, let me repeat, there is nobody, one more time, nobody that does it to the state of the affairs that we do. So it's about empowering this sector of the environment, of our economy, not debilitating it. And it's sad that we've reached this standpoint. So I don't know about you, but I am sick and tired of hearing event after event and being told what and how and what we don't do right. That is really, really sad. Now, I come from Arizona. Nucor's got 2 plants that I visited. They're fabulous. Up in northwestern Arizona with Kingman, the Kingman plant, absolutely fabulous, a core component. And then we got one over in Mesa. And we're a mining state. Copper is one of the 5 C's. So we ought to be embracing this instead of saying no. And I challenge, I'm going to tell you right now, I'm going to challenge my colleagues on the other side of the aisle because they're the principal problem with this, is that it's not about no, it's about what it's going to take to get to yes. Absolutely. I'm tired of Mickey Mousing around the side. What you see for me is what you're going to get. We have a real problem on the other side. It's nothing's good enough. Well, last time I looked, when you're talking about environmental standards, this country reduced its ozone or its greenhouse gases by 2.9%. 2.9%. Nobody's even come close to that. Our quality of energy is unbelievable. The cleanest energy profile, period. The steel that we have, the ISOs, it's unbelievable. I'm a former construction guy. So I go around and I start talking. I said, how do you like the steel? Love the steel. Have not had any problems. Amazing. Amazing. So once again, I thank you for what you do. This person's fed up. Mining is a core part of our heritage, and it will be part of our future. And I'm tired of being victimized instead of being empowered. Thank you.
Okay, going to turn to Mr. Visklosky for an additional round of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I've taken 2 rounds already. I just want to say I appreciate, again, having a long-term perspective. We still face a desperate situation. That's not lost on me. Continue as with the chair, vice chair, and all the members to fight for not only steel, but manufacturing. If we don't make stuff here, we're going to be a stupid country. So I also just want to close again by congratulating you. You are in, as far as, again, all of the improvements you made, a much better situation than I found when I showed up here in 1977. You are successful, I think, because you don't look at a problem and say, this is why we can't do it. It's how can we solve this problem? So for those who have property on that Lake Michigan shoreline, we're looking to rebuild an economy for the people who have lived there. Please help. Please help. But thank you very much, Chairman. Thank you for your indulgence.
Sure, thank you. And I have a few questions before we close. First, I wanted to go to Mr. Conway on the issue of working with our allies and actually achieving better trade enforcement going forward. If you'd care to go into a little more detail, I think Mr. Hoff made a good point that something like the agreement with South Korea is a model. Do you share that view? Are there other things we could be doing in Congress to make sure that we actually build a bigger team against the bad practices of China and others? Go ahead.
Look, we were supportive of the 232 and have been actually singing that song for decades about what was going on in China, what was going on in the rest of the world. But along the way, through a series of cases, dumping cases, countervailing duty cases, we had largely identified who the bad actors were. And there were 10, 12 countries that we knew consistently broke the law and cheated. And we think a way to get at that was to more surgically deal with those countries rather than alienate everybody else in the world with a broad tariff and spend a lot of time arguing about things that didn't make sense. So those quotas that came out of that particular approach, we think that was helpful. You're not going to push 400 million extra tons back into China on your own if you don't have some allies and you don't build some friends and reach consensus with those countries that they're not going to take that Chinese steel and circumvent it into this country. So I just don't see how the practical approach that way can succeed long term. And look, we've had experience with tariffs, our union, in other products and steel in the past. And tariffs are not a long-term solution. They're not going to last forever. So if we don't fundamentally fix the laws and deal with that overcapacity, and, you know, we've been talking about it in the OECD Steel Committee for as long as I can remember, and you know, I've been voting for Pete since I could vote. I mean, we've been doing this forever, and you just aren't going to do this through dialogue. So I think there is a real urgency to build a consensus and turn towards the overcapacity and force it to shut down, and not sort of listen to stories about, oh, we've taken 150 million tons off in the interior of China. But up pops 150 new tons on the coastline, state-of-the-art equipment. And that game's been played on us far too long. So without friends, I think this is gonna struggle, and we'll be caught in this loop of exclusion requests and fights that still go on.
Right. I agree with you, and I think that's a very important take, and I think it's important for this caucus to maintain as balanced and bipartisan view of the situation as we can. You know, some of the comments of my colleagues would suggest that, you know, 232 is the first proactive thing that's ever been done for the steel industry. I don't think that's necessarily true, and I think there still remains a role for presidential leadership to build the kind of team that can shut down more of the world market to China. So that's something we can all work on going forward, I would say. Just a couple other things to get some folks in who haven't really spoken yet. I think this question is best for Mr. Charmley, but others can chime in if they want to. Can you just talk briefly about the importance of the shale revolution for your products in your industry, and, you know, the use of American steel in pipelines and all the drilling equipment and that kind of thing, what it's meant?
Sure. So within Pipe and Tube, which is about 15 million tons of steel used a year, about half of it is OCTG. And a lot of that is downhole and then crossed via fracking. So it's critical to our energy infrastructure to be able to continue to do that. Over the last couple of years, one of the best things about the 232 quota from Korea in particular is that a lot of that product was being used in our energy infrastructure. So as we continue to dig and drill and produce energy locally, the ability to get all of that pipe and steel from the U.S. is critical and is most important for our long-term energy independence.
Thank you. And then just wanted to ask quickly about infrastructure. We'll go to you, Mr. Zelazny, either on my previous question or this, which is simply, I think we all pretty much up here agree that Buy America is incredibly important for any infrastructure package that we have. And I think the question that's been raised a lot in the last year are our Buy America provisions strong enough as they exist now? There's been some reporting about sort of shadowy Chinese and foreign ownership of some of these companies that may qualify under existing laws. So I don't know if maybe Ms. Smith or Mr. Zelazny had a view on that. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, first of all, the Buy America laws are fine as they are written for the most part. The problem is all the loopholes and exemptions and things that eat away at the margins of those and create loopholes by which you can get around, all the trade tariffs and trade laws are essentially a big game of whack-a-mole, right? You stop production at one level and it moves to a downstream product, or it moves to a different point of origin. So to me, Buy America is the most important thing that the Congress can do in terms of infrastructure legislation, because it doesn't distinguish between which countries are our friends or our enemies. It says American steel and American labor is what's going to be used to build our infrastructure. And every country in the world should, that if you're going to look at whatever label you want to apply to it, that's a legitimate thing. Countries that have the capacity to build their own infrastructure should be building their own infrastructure and not have it outsourced and built like you see other countries being willing to give away their raw materials in exchange for a few dollars of infrastructure investment from China. We have the resources to do it, and we have the capacity to do it. So I think Buy America is a very critical piece of it. The other piece, just circling back to a second on the energy markets and energy growth, one of the opposition to our trade case at ITC was a major domestic energy company. And you see this, you saw reports of it about the cracker plant in western Pennsylvania, right? You have these big construction projects with massive cranes on construction sites. And what you're seeing are modules of Chinese steel being brought in from China, not just including the structural steel that becomes the frames to hold these pieces together, but the entire components, dumping pipes, dumping electrical, dumping MEP systems into these modules. And it's not just steel that's being impacted, it's all these other downstream products and construction components. So yes, there are jobs being created at the site to create these, but there are thousands of jobs being lost because we're allowing these modules and we're allowing these fabricated structures to come in. You know, for a while we were walking around with a little display. Modern gunboat diplomacy is a vessel coming in from China with thousands of tons of steel structures on it that are being offloaded and brought to construction sites throughout the Gulf Coast region, throughout the Midwest, and throughout western Pennsylvania. So these are issues that impact everybody's district. These are issues that impact everybody's businesses, and we very much appreciate your interest in understanding. I mean, yes, it's great when the economy grows, but to capture the full benefit of the growth of that economy, Buy America and trade enforcement are critical components.
Sure thing. Ms. Smith, did you have anything to add there? Go ahead.
Yeah, I would just add, in this country, we have a set of values of integrity, and we have great rule of law, and the trading partners that we deal with, they don't value the same things we do, and so Buy America is great. It's the enforcement side, and every time we plug one hole, they find another way, another loophole. We brought a case to Commerce of circumvention out of Mexico, and they were bringing in rebar. They welded a little hook on the end of the rebar, and they labeled it fabricated rebar. And this went on, and it's very easy to identify the mill where that product is produced. There's a marking on it. It's got Nucor's marking, it's got CMC's marking. It's very clear, and whether it was made in the United States or not. At any rate, there was a positive development yesterday where, they did rule that was clear circumvention. But this is our, friendly trading partner. They don't care. They don't value our laws. They don't value integrity and honesty. And so the enforcement side is really, really important here, because I don't have any expectation these countries are going to adopt our values.
Excellent. Thank you. And we'll recognize Mr. Boss before.
Well, first off, thank you, Chairman. And let me kind of look over what we've said here today and just add a few things to it. First off, the 232 done by this administration was vitally important. That being said, something else that's vitally important, and I know hindsight's always 20/20. One, we should have never let China into the WTO. Okay? I mean, we all know and understand that. They cheat, and they're good at it. Now, so what are we doing, and what is this administration doing? One is, we used to always want to have all the multilateral, country trade agreements. Well, when you do that, then you depend on the WTO. Where if you get a bilateral trade agreement with each country, guess what? You're the one who's making the enforcement. You're the one that can make those decisions. I think it's very wise that the administration is going down that path so, Ms. Smith, that they can control exactly what you're talking about. We can see one nation aggressively coming after us, and we can stop it that way instead of depending on a committee or a board, nation or worldwide, that does not have our interest at heart. It's all about being our interest. Now, that being said, that's what we need to do on trade. Now, the other thing that we need to do is we've got to make sure that your products are getting out there. The economy booming, the auto industry, that's great. But now let's talk about this one thing that's out there that has been talked about, but it's kind of like, and I heard this description that was so appropriate this week. You know, an infrastructure bill at the size we're trying to talk about, it's kind of like going to a very nice restaurant and wanting to have a very, very nice bottle of wine. Everybody's willing to drink it, but nobody wants to pay for it. Folks, we've got to understand both Republicans and Democrats and come together in a bipartisan manner and figure out the pay for a major infrastructure bill. It's going to be tough. I had to make those tough votes in Illinois. But as long as we know that we make that investment, it actually goes to where we're trying to direct it, and it's not skimmed off and put in some other government program instead of infrastructure, we've got to make sure it's locked in, a lockbox is put in place, and that we then direct it towards that infrastructure so we can put Americans to work using American product, specifically American steel. Thank you, and I yield back.
Maybe if we hadn't passed a tax bill that rewarded so much tax relief to corporations who weren't paying tax or to the very rich and invested that kind of $1 trillion as seed money.
Actually, if you look at the tax
we'd be
bill,
a lot further along
and
than
don't
we are
go down a
now on
partisan line with me. Okay, don't go down a partisan line with me.
Well,
We've been very good here
there's
today.
a reality to that.
We've been very good here today.
All right. Well,
And let me say this. The middle income have benefited tremendously from the tax, and so has the economy. Now, you can sit there and go, oh, no, but the reality is, look at the economy. You know what? The 401ks of those working men and women that are out there, they're booming, and it's good. And until this virus happened, it was really doing good, and they'll come back. Because why? Because we gave the people their money back to make the investment that we need in this nation. Thank God we did.
Recognize my friend and colleague from Michigan, Mr. Levin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to, even though I may agree with my brother Conway there on that point, I'm going to get us back to a bipartisan thing, which is unexpected for me, but it's a little mea culpa here. One of the few things I ever disagreed with my dad about was China PNTR. And I'm going to agree with Mr. Boss that China, my dad was basically the linchpin of the vote on our side because of the role he plays on trade and allowing China into the WTO regime and giving them permanent normal trading relations status with us. And I don't think it's worked out too good for us. So there you go. We got something to build on, my brother. I want to just, first of all, I apologize for coming late. I know my beloved colleague to the left is the same reason I was. There was a huge Great Lakes thing happening at the same time, and we can't, that's we're from Great Lakes districts. And, but it's really so important that you're here, and we're so devoted to the steel industry and the steel workers. And I just want to tell you, on a going forward basis, that we are going to incorporate Buy American provisions and enforcement of them into everything we do in a much more robust way than we have. And one little personal example, just as a freshman here, I introduced a couple weeks ago my EV Freedom Act, Electric Vehicle Freedom Act, to within 5 years install comprehensive high-speed charging infrastructure throughout the entire national highway system. All covered by Davis-Bacon, all by American. It would create thousands of electrician jobs. It would create thousands of utility worker jobs. If you're going to put 30 high-speed chargers somewhere, you're going to have a new substation there. And it would create a lot of steel jobs and demand for steel to do all this. So we face an existential crisis on this planet, saving life as we know it on this planet. It's going to be, whatever people say, it's going to be a huge economic development opportunity, and it's got to be done in a way
that rebuilds our industrial economy, and we can do it, and we are going to do it. And I really appreciate that the steelworkers were one of the co-sponsors, one of the backers of this bill. We brought labor and environmental groups together and business together on this, and that's the only way we can do this going forward. The utility workers, the steel workers, the auto workers, the Blue Green Alliance, along with a slew of environmental groups. I got a tweet from DTE, so that made my day, my utility on this, and they've got a big stake in it. So we're just devoted in everything we do to designing our legislation so that we grow the steel industry in this country. And anybody who says all this is about globalization or technology change and all this, it's just wrong. It's about policy. You know, Germany has higher labor costs than the United States. Germany has higher unionization rates than the United States, but about twice as much as of Germany's GDP comes from manufacturing than the United States does. So don't give me all these excuses. Our companies and our workers can do what they do if we up here take responsibility for making industrial policy in a bipartisan way that promotes American industry. Thank you.
Thank you, and we're fortunate to have with us a second Appropriations Committee Subcommittee Chairwoman, the great Marcy Kaptur of Ohio, recognized for 3 minutes or however long.
Thank you, Chair Lamb, very much, and Mr. Conway. Well, that's an opening, right? That's just what you came to hear. Yeah. First of all, thank you for your work and for coming to visit with us today. Some of us are thinking about what's going to happen to Burns Harbor in Indiana, as our dear colleague Peter Visklosky has announced he would not be running for re-election. I'm still angry with him. I haven't bought him lunch or anything since I heard that. But anyway, we value his work, as we do every member of this Steel Caucus. I have a couple questions, but Connor mentioned that I chair a committee that deals with all of our nation's energy challenges and manages a dozen and a half research labs across the country that get into many issues, including the use of energy in facilities you may manage. How do we reduce the energy footprint? How do we use our supercomputing capacity and the most brilliant scientists in the world that we have here to help make new product, to innovate in the manufacturing sector? One time I talked to a very well-regarded executive with massive responsibilities, and I said, what's the most important thing I can do for you? He said, reduce my energy costs by half. So I just want you to know that there's an open door to your industry in our subcommittee, and we are always looking for ways to innovate and to create a future so that the industry can be more competitive, both in our country and obviously with many foreign competitors that don't play by the rules. Recently, and I wanted to get your opinion on this, I have two questions. One deals with the condition of the industry right now. President Trump began his campaign for re-election in my hometown, and while there stated that the Republic Steel Mill in Lorain, Ohio was opening and hiring. That is not true. It is shuttered and in bankruptcy. Now, to me, that's unforgivable because I represent that town, and I know what those citizens and workers have been through. I learned yesterday from my colleague who represents Ecorse, Michigan, that U.S. Steel in Michigan was giving pink slips to 1,500 workers. I would like you to frame for me what is happening to employment in the steel industry. What kind of era are we living in here with Chinese dumping and other factors that are impacting your very important industry? And secondly, related to that is, if 232 isn't working, what could? So the first, and maybe you've gone over this prior to my arrival, but I'm very interested in what you see happening in your industry. I see Lorenzo Gonsalves here from Cleveland Cliffs. Thank you for your innovation. Thank you for the investments that you are making in our Great Lakes region. They are historic. And we are going to complete that SULOC and we are going to benefit interlake trade, and that's my gavel. And so I need a little help from other members, but we work on a bipartisan basis on that, and we're moving that along. But thank you very, very much for your commitment to our region of the country. But first question, really, what's really happening in your industry, bottom line? Number two, if 232 isn't working, what could?
Congressman, as it relates to what's going on at Great Lakes Works, that we'll lose probably 1,000 people in an auto supply plant. And if you think about steel, you just can't do it without thinking about auto. And so you lose a plant the size of Lordstown, and it comes offline, and plants in Maryland, and Canadian plants, and Michigan plants, it's having an impact there. Now, we're calling it an idling. Hopefully someday there's a turnaround, but frankly, it's a very optimistic view of what will happen to Great Lakes. And I think those 1,000 people, we're gonna struggle there for a long time. So there's an uncertainty out there. And amongst the companies, I believe, I can't speak for them, but while there's some investment going forward, no one's quite certain what's ever gonna happen next around here and in this industry, and can you really do future planning? And so a lot of what's going on in Detroit and in some other places is sort of related to uncertainty in auto. You know, Ford Motor Company is not gonna build cars in America anymore. They're all gonna go to Mexico. They'll build light trucks and SUVs, and they're all kind of trending and thinking in the same way. I don't know what the country's gonna do if you don't build cars. I mean, if the price of gas goes shooting back up and people want cars, they're all gonna come from Mexico, and they're all gonna get sourced there. So that, we're struggling in Great Lakes and in Detroit, and in a region that can probably least afford to have that happen. We're gonna have a tough time.
Thank you, Mr. Conway, for that realistic assessment. Anyone else want to comment? Yes, Barbara?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, sound economic policy that, you know, creates growth in this country, and we are enjoying good economic times. Some sectors are suffering more than others, but a lot of this comes back to the excess global capacity. And, you know, we're all private industries. We all have to have a profit motive. In order to attract capital, we have to generate a return, a sufficient return, because investors have a lot of options. And if we can't generate the return, they're gonna go somewhere else. And if we don't have profits, we can't reinvest in the latest technology, we cannot reinvest in our people, et cetera. The global industry, 70% or so, is state-owned enterprises. There is no profit motive. And so we do not have a level playing field on which to compete. The tariffs were very helpful. We all know that's a temporary measure. We've talked here this morning about, you know, permanent trade reform, and that will need to come behind that to sustain the benefits that brought to us. But I think Tom was talking earlier, we need your help in addressing this issue of the excess global capacity. And it's a long-term issue. A lot of that resides in China, but it's not only China. Turkey has set their whole steel industry up for an export market, which is just about taking our jobs. And these are high-quality, high-paying, middle-class jobs. And the United States will need to work with these other countries to put the pressure on the countries that have the excess capacity, that is not environmentally sound, that does not pay the living wage, and they need to bring that in balance to support their economy, but not to dump product. We can compete if we have a level playing field.
Congresswoman.
Steel industry is 10 times more productive than most of these countries around. I can go on and on and on. I'm going to yield to Leon because obviously we're very passionate about this.
You asked a great question about what else can we do. I would tell you 232 did work. One of the greatest things about 232, it was immediate. If you look at this panel, all of us have to go through a process that essentially takes about 2 years. So by the time our industries are affected and devastated and jobs are lost, that's when the trade enforcement comes in, and that many times it's too late. And so that period of time, and I was talking to someone last night that used the analogy, by the time the fire department shows up, the house is already burnt to the ground. That's an inordinate amount of time, as we have to face a year of the impairments and then prove for a year that the impairments were real. It's a blight in terms of our industry and getting an immediate response to help. And so I don't know what can be done there, but if we can shorten that window to something more realistic, 6 months or even a year, that would have a huge effect on all of us on this panel.
Thank you, Congressman, or Congresswoman. A couple of things you said. You talked about the DOE. We're working with the DOE at Lawrence Livermore, using their supercomputers to model a hot strip mill. I would urge you to be more active in an industrial policy. It used to be industrial policy was, no, we don't do that in the U.S. We did it through the Defense Department, but we didn't actually have an actual industrial policy. Somebody mentioned before South Korea. South Korea makes OCTG. They have no domestic oil and gas industry. That industry was built to export to the United States, pure and simple. And it's taking away jobs and product in the U.S. So
What does that, tell me what that stands for?
oil country tubular goods, the pipes that
of
go
course,
down
yes,
hole.
yes, yes.
Yeah, and so they don't have that industry. They built it with state-owned entities, government support, and industrial policy to export. And they did that because they saw the jobs, not necessarily the profit of their companies, but the job and the development of their society. And so that's what we face. We're not in that same boat. We're competitors, and we have to do the things that we can to build our businesses. If you look at the 232, back to that, was it effective? Yes, I'm kind of a wonky policy person by nature. If
Good,
you
we
read the
need
actual,
you. We need you.
well, if you actually read the report, one of the things that it was supposed to do was to allow us to generate the revenue to reinvest. We've all talked about all the reinvestment we're doing. We can't reinvest everywhere, but we're reinvesting in advanced technology in our facilities. And that's, to modernize, and build the facilities and create the advanced manufacturing jobs we need for a new economy.
Well, I would invite you to my office to give me a summary from your industry of what innovation, advanced research, energy systems might help your industry beyond what has already occurred. There's been a transformation. When I was quite young, I used to drive through Congressman Visklowski's district to go to college in Wisconsin. And I remember what the atmosphere looked like, and I remember how many mills were chugging away. I used to go to Pittsburgh, and there are no more mills left in Pittsburgh. So I'm old enough to have seen, there's one?
It's not in the city limits, but it's in the region.
Oh, all right.
And they're putting $1 billion in the coming years.
Whose district is that in?
Mike Doyle. While we're on this topic, I did want to ask, because I think it's related and it'd be good for the chairwoman to hear, the DOE's Better Plants initiative. I know many have probably benefited from it, but I understand that Mr. Brett and ArcelorMittal have been a partner since 2013, and Ms. Smith is nodding her head as well. Yes. The chairwoman has funded that program through DOE appropriations, and maybe you could just tell us how it's helped, if there's anything that can be improved, or give us some feedback on it.
Sure, thank you for the opportunity, and before I start, I would be remiss if I didn't thank you for the great work you did on the Appropriations Committee to get the funding for the Sulaks. That's very important to us.
I had a lot of help. That was bipartisan, and we maintain that band of soldiers for you.
Again, thank you. No, the program was quite good. So as you said, we've been involved since 2013. What we do is we work closely with the Department of Energy experts, and there's other manufacturing companies involved as well. And so we're looking for ways to implement energy efficiency measures. And it's a collaborative effort, and some of the things that you first hear might sound a little hokey, but like one of the things they do is they call them treasure hunts. And they just walk the plant, and they'll listen to see if they hear air that's, compressed air leaking or whatever, and you'll be amazed, what they do. And it's really become, again, something that sounds a little hokey, that people really love it. And now, really, we have people that are volunteering, and we almost have too many volunteers to say, hey, I want to be part of this, to go around. So it's been very effective. In 2018, actually, our Cleveland operations, they were the first integrated steelmaker to earn the 50,001 ready designation. And what it's all about is the plant's energy management system. So right now, we're engaged in that at our Burns Harbor facility. The other thing that they offer is in-plant training. So we take advantage of that. It's been a very good program. On the subject of the Department of Energy, and you asked, what else can be done? And when you were busy attending other matters, we did talk about infrastructure. So that is important. And it's not only the demand for steel, but it's also, clearly, it's a way to move goods. But more importantly, and from my perspective, it's access to economic opportunities. And it's improvement in productivity. It improves our quality of life. So we benefited on both sides of it. The energy, what we could really need your help in is ensuring the department's funded and that they really are serious and have a real clear path to, there's a lot of technological advancements. We've talked a lot about CO2 today. Sure, we are the world leaders as an industry, but I agree with Congressman Zelazny, we can do better, right? We're piloting a lot of things throughout the globe. We're actually looking at converting waste wood to biocoal and charging that. We're actually capturing gases and converting those into ethanol, and so we're going to decarbonize the transportation. We're looking at reducing iron through hydrogen electrolysis. They're all viable. They are viable. They're very, very expensive. That's okay. We can get there together. So, what do we need? One, we need a level playing field. My colleagues have talked about it. I didn't coin this term, but it resonates with me. There are no borders in the sky. We shouldn't lose sight of that. So if we're going to do things in this country, let's make sure that people are bringing steel in, they have the same requirements we do. The second thing that would be helpful is we need access to renewable energy, but affordable prices. We'll get there. The third thing is, again, this financing. All this is doable. We also hear about carbon capture and storage. That's viable. It is. But you need an infrastructure, and again, we have to get the cost down. So again, I think all these things we can do and even make us better, stronger than we are today. Thank you.
Okay, we're coming to the end. They'll call us to vote for a few minutes, but Mr. Gonsalves, if you want to give us a parting shot here, and then we should be wrapping up.
Thank you so much, Chairman Lim. Congresswoman Captur, just remind you that in your district, we are going to start a new plant. You know that. And you're going to be there for the ribbon cutting ceremony. As far as what's needed beyond this 232 is enforcement. The laws are great. If you don't enforce, there's no way we are going to win. All this steel that comes finds its way to the United States, they don't, the coils, the bars, the rebars, everything, they don't come here by themselves. They don't swim. Somebody in the United States brought this steel in. And if we're talking national security, they are working against national security. We discussed here the example of electrical steels. The ones that are circumventing are companies that are established inside the United States. Some are fully American. Some others are multinational companies. Well, they are working against national security. The other thing that I think that it's overdue, we need to understand that we are the best, but we are not talking that we are the best. We're proving. We're giving you numbers. We are not going to get that from the universities. They have too many Chinese students paying full tuition. They are not going to say a word against China. It's not coming from them. It will come from us. It will come from our workers, and hopefully it will come from our elected officials. Thank you.
Okay, with that, I think we're going to conclude. I really want to thank all of you and everyone in the crowd. I also just want to acknowledge the staffs, particularly my own staff, but also the staff of Mr. Boss and Mr. Crawford, our vice chairman, who put a lot of work into getting this room and putting it all together and coordinating everything. They did a great job. So thanks, everybody, for another successful year. Please stay in touch, and we'll see you next year.